where common sense meets enlightenment. Conversations around mind, body, and spirit. Each month, a group of wellness thought leaders assemble to discuss topics like rage, wisdom in the 21st century, our mental chatter, and how to build healthy relationships.
Good evening, wisdom seekers. You're listening to the Wisdom Track podcast from the British Association of Anger Management, or BAM for short. You can find BAM over at angermanage.co.uk. The Wisdom Track is where we take a holistic look at our core values, including raising self-awareness, honing emotional intelligence, and learning communication skills. You can listen to the Wisdom Track at Apple Podcasts, on our YouTube channel, which is called the Wisdom Track, on Spotify, and on something called Buzzsprout. Whenever you do listen, please smash the like button, maybe leave a comment, perhaps even subscribe if that facility is available, because those kind of things really help us get the message out to the widest number of people. Today we're actually talking about how we communicate with ourselves in an episode dubbed The Neglected Self. With us today, a BAM co-founder, the anger guru Mike Fisher, and our website columnist, the US-based therapist Craig Snake Bloomstrand. Joining them are Alex von Bisser and Scott Fee. We spend prodigious amounts of energy on our relationships with others. But how's our relationship with ourselves? If that sounds obtuse, Snake is going to kick the podcast off by explaining. Here he is.
And particularly talking about the neglected relationship. I put an article out a month or so ago, and I was surprised at the response to it, where so many people, myself included, spend so much time on relationships with the other, lovers, partners, business associates. And, we hone our skills over a lifetime in terms of what it is to be in relationship. And yet seldom consider how many of those sensibilities that we learn actually apply to ourselves and the relationship we have with ourselves as well. An example that I gave earlier was I was at one point in a very combative relationship. And things that I shared in intimate moments would come back during fights. For instance, at that point, I was fathering 2 kids and insecure about whether I was a good father or not. And of course, that came back in a fight as, "You're a bad father." And I was outraged when this woman would insult in that way. Yet those very same insults ran through my head all the time, and I never monitored them. And so it really brought up for me how important that relationship with myself is, how it changes over time, and even more important, how it can be informed by the relationships that we have outside with others. And so it felt appropriate. Mike is a longtime friend of mine. Alex von Bitter is with us today, and he also is a longtime friend, and Scott Fee. All 3 of these men have never really met one another, but I'm the common glue in terms of friendship. And so it felt like the right group to bring together, and that we've all formed relationships with one another, different relationships, and a lot centered on answering that question: how can we improve or make a good relationship with ourselves? So over decades, we've watched each other build relationships with self as well as with others. So I believe you all know Mike at this point in time, but I'd like Scott and Alex. Alex first. Why don't you introduce yourself, Scott? Alex.
Sure. Alex Von Bitter. I'm calling in from New York City, and I was raised in Switzerland, which I left when I was 21, and I've lived in the States ever since. Had no intentions of emigrating, but got stuck here with work and then marriage and a daughter. And I read Snake's words all the time, and every once in a while we have a long chat and lots of laughs about ourselves mostly and our relationships. So in terms of the subject at hand, I was raised, I think, typically Swiss in terms of self-reliance, and that the minute we're done with military service or education, we leave the house or we pay rent. And so that marked me in that work was essential, because there was no money coming or support coming from my parents. And I thought that was perfectly natural. And I also learned to ask the question, what can I do for the community? What can I do for others rather than myself? And that anything self-centered is narcissistic. So I was in the hotel and restaurant business for 50 years. And also there, I learned that the customer is always right. Mm-hmm. So it took the death of my father when I was 35 to wake up slowly. Why? Because I got the call from my brother while I was in the restaurant working lunch service. And I said, I can't talk right now, I'm busy. I'll call you after lunch. That was the first indication that my work came always first, my relationship with my work, with my customers, with my employees. I called my brother, then I called my mother. I said, of course, I'm coming home tomorrow. And she says, no, don't come tomorrow. Come when everybody has left. That's when I need you. And I said, all right. And I didn't go. And it took me several years to figure out that I really needed to be there for myself. And I got really pissed. And we headed out, my mother and I, and it took her about 2 years to see it for what it was for me. And that was the beginning of taking care of myself and looking after myself, and not just the customer. The wonderful thing is that I just closed my restaurant 2 years ago, and there are very few people that called me since, where before it was hundreds of calls a day. And so I was very happy to have friends like Snake and the Mankind Project to teach me what other friendships could be like, especially male friendships, but now also women friendships. And that's me in context of this question.
Thanks, Alex. And Scott, how about you?
Thanks, Snake. Hello, everybody. This is a terrific vibe, even through the screen. I can feel it and feel you all. This is a nice gathering. I've known Snake since I did my Mankind Project weekend in 2007, and have had an amazing journey with him since. We learned then that our paths had energetically crossed in 2001 when he brought Mankind Project work to South Africa, and it was a South African who told me about the Mankind Project years later. Myself and my relationship with self has been front and center for me the last 18 months in a way it has not been in the previous 50 years of my life. I'm a professor and have been on leave for the last 18 months with medical issues and behavioral issues and relationship issues, and find myself for the first time in my life living alone, and faced all day, every day, all waking moments with my relationship with myself. And it's becoming very clear. This is a whole new subject, a whole new discipline, a whole new journey, because it really hasn't been where I put my focus for all of my life. And so I feel like I'm still with training wheels around relationship to self. I can talk forever about my roles, dad and husband and professor and advisor and whatever. But my relationship with self, I feel hesitant to even talk about it, which is exactly why I've been invited by Snake to talk about it, I think. And I'm both uncomfortable and with the idea, but very comfortable in this space and in this conversation with Snake and with this group of folks. I'll say that anything I have to say about my relationship with self is going to either be really honest and clumsy, or very theoretical and BS. So I know I don't have to ask Snake to do this, and probably there's several others here that do this well and naturally, but anyone wants to ring a bell or raise a hand or say, knock it off, I'm open ears to hearing, to get back on track and talk about the real. I have had health problems for the last year and a half that I've really never had to deal with it in such intense ways that keep me from doing things. I'm also living alone, and I have a dog, which is a fairly new thing in my life. And taking care of that dog has literally been my syllabus for taking care of myself. She has helped me become aware of things like regular feeding patterns and regular patterns of, oh, check the water bowl. I literally drink more water because I gave my dog a smaller bowl, and when hers is empty, I have to drink. My relationship with self is I'm in 101 right now, and it's some days it's fascinating to me that I made it to 50, having not paid attention to my own body and my own needs and my own hunger and thirst at times, because I was busy with work or busy with other roles or doing the important stuff. And so this is certainly not going to be me spouting expertise, which as a professor, I like being the smartest one in the room. I am not today. I look forward to where this goes. Thanks for asking me to be here, Snake. It's always a gift when I get an invitation from you into the unknown.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. As we're talking too, I was recalling a story that when I first got curious about more than what I thought was the blueprint for living a life, because like so many, I got out of school, I got a job, I started a career, had 2 kids and a dog, bought a house. I followed the blueprint. This is what it looks like to be a man, to step out in the world, to be an adult. And there came a weekend where on Friday, my 5-year-old son was hit by a car and thrown 30 feet. Wasn't hurt, but I was summoned home from work, emergency, ambulance, all of that. That shock hit me. And the following day, my dad died. And those 2 things back to back really rocked me. And a neighbor friend asked me, how are you doing? And I said, fine. And she got in my face and went, fine? How can you be fine? What do you feel? You know, your kid almost died and your dad did die, and you're telling me you're fine? Now, I was probably 35 at that point, and it had never occurred to me, how am I doing? I was busy every day. I was productive. I was successful. But that really started my path in terms of, well, what do I feel? What am I thinking? What's the status within me? Which really was the seed for beginning to develop a relationship with myself. And thank God for that woman getting in my face, incredulous. It had never occurred to me at 35. And I both find that tragic that so many of us follow that pattern, and some trauma wakes us up to think, well, what about me? But how much gets in the way as well along the way? And also, I have a little bit scorn for the blueprint that I came up with to begin with, because I made it up based on what I saw around me. And none of those people were particularly happy or had functional relationships with themselves either. So, you know, maybe a logical place to take this too is, what caused you to begin to develop a relationship with yourself? And Scott's somewhat answered that for himself at this moment. But Alex, I'm curious about you. What caused you to step out?
Well, in my 40s, that's 5 years after my father's death. I took stock, and at work, they always told me that I didn't spend enough time at work, and at home, where I was a recent father, I was never home enough, long enough that I could make a difference in my wife's opinion. So I was basically pulled in both directions at all times, and there was very little time where I had by myself. And I realized that this could not go on. And when I got the invitation to the Mankind Project, that was at age 42, I just woke up, because not only did we do a deep dive, what's really going on feeling wise, we learned the tools to identify, build friendships, build relationships, and also be honored as a man and as a father and as a husband. And so instead of having no time, I got plenty more time because I allocated it differently after age 42. And the allocation was such that I had some non-negotiables in my relationships. One was vacation time. One was personal alone time in the morning to be with myself, to study, to meditate, to learn yoga, and also adventure travel. My wife was a professional flight attendant flying all over the world. And that was one of my attractions to her, is that she was self-sufficient. She could go any place, she could have fun. Well, the minute she became a mom, she wanted to stay home only. And I still had this drive to go on adventure travels. I wanted to go to the Amazon. I wanted to go to the desert. And so it became a non-negotiable. I get my trips, I get my alone time. And that changed everything. That changed all my relationships. Work was not that important anymore. I was good at it. I didn't have to spend that much time on it, or not as much as before. The same at home. I became a really good father. I decided that, I think it was age 50, I decided that my daughter, my only daughter, deserved her inheritance while I'm alive. So we bought her a horse farm. And that's where we're moving to the end of this year, to be closer to her. It shifted all of that blueprint that I grew up with, and that Snake refers to. There's no reason that inheritance has to wait. There's no reason we cannot have these different relationships and spend time and also make room for ourselves. And that's what I did. Non-negotiables. This is where I come first. 2 hours in the morning, every morning. After that, I'll do anything that's required for the household or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Alex. How about you, Mike? Either is thinking or he froze, one or the other.
You hear me?
Yeah. Nope, your internet's going wacky, Mike.
I might have to change my.
Yeah, you're pretty garbled, Mike. But we'll leave you go for the moment. You can pitch in if you unfreeze. It's I guess to build on that, one could make the assumption that at a certain point there's a crossroads. And, you know, for me, it was simply being very unhappy, running too fast, going too far, not paying much attention to myself. And it all kind of collapsed with a divorce and a big, big shift in my life. And yet I didn't really know what I was seeking. It's in hindsight, looking back, that I realized the deficit of having any kind of relationship with myself was the source of the unease. And, you know, it was frightening at the same time and continues to be from time to time in terms of the relationship I have with myself is constantly changing. I was aware of that last weekend. I was up north with my grandkids and my kids who are in their 40s at this point in time. They're no longer kids. And realized the different role that I have as a grandpa than the role I had as a father. And appreciating that is adding more complexity to the relationship I have with myself. It's like there's a whole cast of characters that have matured within me over the years that are all about that relationship that I've had with myself. And I think good friends, and both Scott and Alex have done this for me in the past, where they've looked me in the eye and said, really? You're bigger than that. Give it a try in different ways. And that's helped an awful lot to have that encouragement and be witnessed as well.
I would like to say something about the language of encouragement. When I was waking up to my own self-care, I was doing the first Mankind Weekend in Germany, in German. And I hadn't spoken German in years. And it was pretty scary. But what I learned, it wasn't the processes, it wasn't the protocols, it wasn't the language. The language of loving and supporting each other is not tied up into language. We all understood each other perfectly. And I thought that it would be practical and desirable for me to have affirmations in my own Swiss German language. And I couldn't find any appropriate words that were encouraging. So I asked one of my banker customers if he could name some of the encouraging words he heard from his parents or in school. And he says, we don't do that in Switzerland. So I was left with the distinct experience that the words in German or in Swiss German, particularly when we say goodbye, we say, do it right. You know, it's not even take care of yourself. No, it's just do it right. Follow the rules. You know the rules. Be a good citizen. All of that kind of stuff. And I'm very grateful to have learned and studied English, because there are lots of encouraging words. And maybe we overdo it with our youth these days, where everybody gets the trophy. But certainly, we never got trophies. So another thing that I found very helpful for me is that there were never any photographs of me having a good time. So I started collecting pictures where I actually look happy. And when I'm in a down mood or I am dealing with some struggles, I look at this album. I have maybe a dozen by now. And I'm a pretty happy guy, but I never showed it.
Yeah, one of the dynamics that shows up for me related to that is if I want to go in my shop and one of my real joys is creating art, sculpture, whatever, I'm always busy in the shop doing that. But I have to earn the right to do that. That still lives inside me. That somehow I have to do something unpleasant to earn the time for me that feeds me. And I've certainly gotten better at it as I've become aware, but that wiring is still strong in there, that somehow I have to make sure the decks are clean before I have fun. And it's no longer useful for me in many ways. I may get what needs to be done, but I also cheat myself out of that joy time and that recuperation time.
You know, as you guys speak, some things are coming up for me that I don't often take the time to not necessarily be grateful for, but recognize the impact it had on me and on my relationship to myself. My parents, my mom started a small daycare center just actually while she was pregnant with me. I'm the oldest of three boys, and I grew up in Chicagoland, about 30 miles outside, 30 miles from the Sears Tower in Chicago, down the southern edge of Chicagoland. We were the second to last train stop, and south of us was just corn, beans, pigs, and cows. But it was an amazing time, late 60s, early 70s, when suburbs were growing, divorces were happening, the single parent situation was increasing, and daycare was a huge need. And my mom started a small thing in her mother's house, and it grew to 5 different daycare centers. My dad quit his job and joined her, and they built a little building block daycare center empire in southern Chicagoland. And as the oldest, I was there from the beginning and was a student until I was old enough to mop and paint and help. And then I had two little brothers, and I was always kind of responsible for go take care of them and get this work done. But it was inside of a daycare center with amazing teachers. Some of the women that worked there were there for 40 years, literally knew me from prenatal till I was 40. And my dad, in addition to being Mr. Tom to my mother's Miss Diane at Building Block Daycare Center, he was also Coach Fee in baseball, basketball, and football. And I carry a bag around that's got some of my patches, including 1976 American football patch. So from when I was 6 until about 8th grade, my dad was my coach. He was Mr. Tom at the daycare center. He was dad at home. And my mom was Miss Diane. She was at every game and really active in our church. And those different organized caring spaces, sports for young kids, a daycare center, a church, and our home, and also great grandparents and grandparents. I knew almost all of my greats and my grandparents. I was cared for and also had accountability. I was watched, I was seen. And being the oldest boy, the oldest of 3, had some responsibilities that came along with that. But relationships were with groups and with with a network, and I had friendships and one-on-one, but I cared for others and others cared for me in teams, almost parent teams or grandparents or the people at the daycare center, the coaches, the clergy, the people that were leaders at the church. And although that was a lot of amazing energy and love and care, it wasn't a lot of individual accountability to self. And I think that I got really good from that at being part of caring for others, or if I were in need of help or care because I was sick, because of something going on in my life, it felt really normal to kind of huddle up, me, my wife, and my son, or me and my two brothers, or me and close friends, me and Mankind Project guys. It's this relationship to self one-on-one that, Alex, as I hear about your journey and some of the kind of decisions and needs that you've identified and then figured out a way to meet with some hours per day for addressing that, I realize anything that I have done kind of with myself and only myself was usually for some other goal or other metric that someone else would measure, like something for, I was in school for a very long time, didn't expect to become a professor, so I ended up getting a PhD kind of late in life, and I was great at that because someone else had set the goalposts and told me what to get done, when to get it done. A lot of my work, I've been a professor 25 years, that's a very natural rhythm of semesters and giving others guidelines and living on that semester rhythm. I don't know that I realized until, I don't know, since this pandemic, maybe, that I can have specific needs, wants, responsibilities to myself that
not just about the bricks.
I can use the same methods to take care of myself that I've used to help others take care of themselves, or for us as a team to help us as a team get a thing done, us as a family, us as a class, us as a couple, my wife and I. And yeah, relationship to self was built in to relationship to others, but never identified independently. And that has made me feel a real rookie in the last couple of years in trying to do a good job living alone, taking care of myself. And that humility is not a common, it's an unusual feeling for me to feel humbled by my lack of spending time on thinking about taking care of myself and having the reflexes, I don't seem to have found my own instinct to self-care beyond the basics of biology. And I'm gonna steal and repurpose some of what Alex just shared about, it makes me giggle to hear about the challenges of finding supporting words in your native tongue. I grew up in a daycare center, like I should write a big, puffy, soft, warm, nice, smells like cookies book about supportive language. I know that language. But when you used what I am projecting as like the typical rigidity and rule-basedness of your childhood, and you applied that to taking care of yourself, that blew my mind. That was a beautiful kind of flip that you did, where instead of using it to do good work or raise well-behaved children, you used it to learn yoga and care for yourself. And I just found that beautiful and inspirational, and appreciate you sharing what you did that way.
There's a dark cloud hanging over this whole thing too, because, and I want to just acknowledge it, is in the article I mentioned, I asked the question, what kind of relationship do you have with yourself? Harsh, critical, judgmental, nurturing, caring. I mean, the list goes on. And when I wrote that, I'm thinking, well, yeah, all of that. I've certainly been my harshest judge. I've been my best advocate. All of those different things roll in. And the reason I bring that up is because Scott, being somewhat of a newbie and learning these things about yourself, the ability to move from the judgment to the nurturing part of a relationship with myself is all about how well I know myself. I know that judgmental voice real well. And I know if I give it its freedom to roam around, causes all kinds of mischief. And I know myself well enough too that if I get caught up in too much hubris about being too great, there's peril there too. But on that sliding scale of what's appropriate for me and my relationship with myself, it took erring on the side of not caring for myself enough and getting sick, or thinking I was larger than I needed to be and failing, or whatever the case may be. There was self-knowledge in much the same way that we get into relationship with other people. It's not dissimilar. I just neglected that relationship with myself. It never occurred to me. And so whether it's relationship in the classic sense, or whether it's being self-aware enough, knowing yourself well enough to know what feeds you and what depletes you, they're very much linked together.
I know earlier on I was cut off, and I don't necessarily need to go into how I made whatever connections I made, but I'm as I listen to this conversation, I think what stands out for me, it's like where do I show up in my life, and where don't I show up in my life?
Mm-hmm.
I think most of my life I've been showing up for everybody else, never showing up for myself, because that was my training. It's about thinking about everybody else. And then, of course, the confusion for me was being told in my first marriage how selfish I was, which was really disorientating. And I never really quite understood what it meant to be selfish. So I was too embarrassed to say, well, what do you mean by selfish? I have no idea what you mean. But it meant something to my first wife. So she must have been, onto something there. But I was just very confused because I was doing everything for everybody else. So I was showing up for everybody else, but I wasn't showing up for myself. Mm. And so, as I kind of enter into this dialogue and I think about the question that you're asking, Snake, there's something to be said about how and when am I going to prioritize myself? And what does that mean to prioritize myself? Mm. So the questions that are raised for me in terms of the dialogue that's being had here is, are we really talking about a low self-esteem issue? Is that what we're talking about here? Because, most of the individuals I work with have low self-esteem issues.
Mm-hmm. Low or exaggerated high. It can go either way. Yeah, you froze again, Mike.
Whether it's group therapy, the Mankind Project, thousands of personal development workshops.
I think you're patching in and out, Mike. You're back now.
Am I back yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So this morning, I'm sorry about that, folks. I mean, some of you might not know this, but I'm in Hungary, and the IP in Hungary is not that great. But this morning, I was thinking about this conversation we're going to have this afternoon, and I started to reflect on when did I start reparenting myself? Because the therapeutic process, as far as I'm concerned, is a reparenting process. So feeling cared for and loved and respected and reassured by the many therapists I've worked with and by the many group facilitators I've worked with, they kind of kept reminding me of how important I am. Not from a narcissistic perspective or even an egocentric perspective, but how important it was and healthy it was to make myself a priority. And yet, there was such a foreign and vague experience. What did that mean to be a priority in my own life? What did it even mean to show up in my own life? And I think in many ways that's still my journey. I think the only difference today is that I've become my own best friend. And the reason for that is because I spend so much time alone. So it's irrelevant where I am in the world. You know, for example, some of you know I live in Spain, but I don't speak Spanish. So where does the conversations that I have go, and who are the conversations I have with? Well, one is, of course, I have conversations with my girlfriend and her daughter and anybody else who speaks English. But a lot of the time, I'm pretty quiet, very quiet. And the only other time I'm either proactive is in my group work, my one-to-one therapeutic work. But I've had to develop a relationship. I've had to become my own best friend. I remember when I separated from my first wife, the 4 years that I was alone was a way of developing an intimate, healthy relationship with those different parts of me that I neglected. So there's something to be said from where, in terms of my journey, it's like reconnecting to those different parts of me that I neglected. And it raises the question, who am I? Who am I in all of this? I don't have an answer for that, just by the way, but I think that is the significant question. So when somebody says to me, how are you? The question really is, well, which part of me are you talking to? So now there's an I and there's a me. This is really fucking confusing. You know, when I go into a shop and somebody says, can I help you? You know, which you, me, is needing help. So, you know, I can see how disorientating it is, and I can see how confusing this language is. So, for example, you know, I'm sitting in therapy and I say to my therapist, I feel sad. And he says, well, how do you know you feel sad? Well, I feel it. Well, how do you know you feel it? I just feel it. But how do you know that you feel sad? Do you get where I'm going with this?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Mike, it's
okay, good.
It's a part of the article that I tried to embed too by giving the example of my body and my head speak two completely different languages. My head loves making shit up and arguing for the result, and my body is about keeping all the machinery working and singularly focused on survival. Well, those two examples are one of 100 of different characters that I've discovered inside myself. Petty, generous, forgiving, judgmental, coming to know all of those different ones. And I continue to find more to develop in different ways so that they're congruent with what my values are. Not perfect by any means. And it's part of the fascination for me too, is to a certain degree, we're infants through our entire life. And I like that idea. That's not a frightening concept to me at this point. It's exciting that there's new parts of me emerging, developing, maturing all the time. And if I can be aware enough and resist the impulse to push away change, it's really benefited me a lot in terms of just how I show up in the world. I mean, I grew up an incredibly shy child that would cry if anyone spoke to me. And, you know, that part is still there. I can still feel it, but it's no longer active in my day-to-day interactions with people. So the self-knowledge fits into this every bit as much as having a relationship with others or the relationship with myself. It's how do we relate, like you say, Mike, to these various different characters that inhabit our psyches and our bodies. One of the most confusing ones for me is I've pushed my body beyond all belief at different times and, ignored it, not cared for it in different ways, and given priority to my head and whatever objective I've got ahead of me. And to sit back and be grateful for the endurance that my body's had over the years feels like a proper and fitting thank you.
That brings me. Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Alex. Go ahead.
What I think in psychology, what Snake is talking about is called part work.
Yeah.
And we're all familiar with it. It's all very natural. Part of me feels this, part of me feels that. There's a critical part, there's a happy part, all of that. And I've been involved for the last 2 years with a program called Omega Point Project. And I've mentored and coached some people through it, men and women. And I love this work. I love going inside and seeing, okay, which part of me is driving the car today? And maybe it's not the part I should trust with driving my car today. And having this dialogue with taking the irresponsible part of me and put them in the back seat. You can be here and I recognize you're there, but this is not the job for you. This job requires different skills and different mindset and different experiences. Just because you were hurt when you were 16 doesn't mean that this is relevant today. So I'll get back to you, that kind of thing. Having a choice to listen to them and also facilitate the banter between them. And frankly, Snake, I'm very, very surprised that you only have 100 parts. I think all of us have far more.
Well,
maybe
I'm just beginning.
No, but what you can do with these parts, the ones that are productive and the ones that are healthy, they can get together and form your circle of advisors.
Yeah.
And if you can identify those parts, or the grandfather part that is required now for your children, for your grandchildren, that's a wonderful experience. And like you say, one of the ways of staying relevant and healthy and interesting is to be curious about all this.
Yeah, and I think that's where I felt cheated and maybe cheated myself around accepting the blueprint, because basically I was modeling myself off others and imagining what was going on inside others rather than turning the mirror around and looking inside for the answers, which are the relevant answers. And, some of those characters are, let's say, naughty, and given the freedom within a safe place to be able to let them exercise is as important as some of the more benevolent characters. It's complete self-knowledge, and that takes a level of honesty, I think, around. It's easy to judge the naughty parts and say, don't go there, don't indulge them. But then they've got gifts that I've discovered along the way that I wouldn't have discovered if I'd been too fearful to let them out. And granted, there's boundaries around that just for our own physical and emotional safety. But being willing to explore that part of me that is mean or vindictive has been every bit as valuable for me as the loving parts. And I keep a leash on them too, now that I do know them.
The question comes up for me is, I believe we all have a part that's called the manipulator.
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to own up when you're manipulating circumstances and people and events to your advantage?
Mm-hmm. And I think along with what you're saying, I've been a big advocate for repurposing some of these different skill sets. In other words, when I was growing up, I was small, lived in a real tough neighborhood, and unless I kept all my radar up, I'd get whacked. And so I grew up always paying attention, listening for clues and the words of other people and the actions of other people. And quite frankly, it made me paranoid and withdrawn and quiet. And the repurposing for me was serving as actual skills when I facilitate or create different programs. I know how to pay attention just like that little kid did and pick up on the cues and the words and process that quickly because I learned that skill as a child protecting myself, repurposed it as an adult for good rather than paranoia.
Alex, you said something I thought was, Alex, can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, I can.
Cool. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
great. You said something which I thought was really interesting, was around this idea of curiosity. And it really struck a chord with me because as a therapist, I'm really curious. But do I ever spend time being curious about myself? You know, my thoughts and my feelings, my actions, my behaviors. Most of my, well, in fact, the last 34 years, 35 years, if not longer, I've been curious about this thing called life, curious about the people. But there's something really interesting in terms of maybe one of the ways I neglect myself is by not being curious about my thought processes or my feelings or my experiences, what in fact is going on in my body. And yet I think as a culture, as a humanity, we are curious. I think we're hardwired to be curious. But my curiosity is outward thinking or outward seeing. And I think there's something that you're saying which I find interesting in being able to turn the actual lens on myself and look at what a curious being I am and how I deal with those different parts. So the example I want to give, you know, I'm about to leave here. I'm leaving here next Thursday. And one of the things I'm doing is I've got to finish up all the work that those of you, some of you know that I'm in Hungary because I've been doing a series of ceramic workshops. And I come to the end by next Thursday. I drive back to Spain. And I've been putting myself under immense amount of pressure to get everything done. So that's a part of me. And then I have to remind that part, you don't have to put yourself under pressure. But that's one of the things I do. I'm constantly putting myself, that part of me is constantly putting itself under pressure. And then there's this observer witness. And some of you know I've spoken about the observer witness. And there's something about just being able to catch myself and say, you don't have to do that. It's okay not to complete your tasks. You can finish your tasks when you get back to Spain or when you get back from South Africa. And I suppose that's the other dimension to what you're talking about, Snake, which is that disconnect between the body and the mind, or the body and feelings. Because there's a sense of urgency, and I feel it in my body. And that was the moment I was able to say, well, hold on a second. I don't have to put myself under pressure. No one's died, and no one's holding a gun to my head. So that body-mind split, or that body-feeling split, is such a fundamental resource. And some of you know in anger management, I talk about you've got to use your body as a resource. You've got to tune into your body. You've got to check out what's happening in your body, because your body will always tell you that something's not appropriate or something weird is happening.
And it tells the truth.
Check in on yourself.
The body tells the truth,
And
but
it tells
the
the
mind,
truth.
not so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. The
Well,
body
the
never
mind-
lies.
The mind was programmed by amateurs. We all know that. So some of those program mistakes, they can be fixed when they're recognized.
Mm-hmm.
And, your mind is pretty crazy, Snake, and it's going to take years to explore that, and that's the joy of our friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. Scott, I'm wondering how this is landing on you. You've kind of faded into the background. What do you got to say for yourself?
I think I was exploring my relationship with self by being a listener, with a camera on in front of me. In this era of Zoom classes, if the camera's on and I'm in a Zoom room, I'm professing, I'm speaking, it's very nice to be listening and be doing all of this for myself, not for my work, not for my students, not for my whatever. And there's a for me a return to childishness, which we use childishness to demean, and it's unnecessary or simple, or it's seldom a compliment. You're behaving very childishly today is not really ever given as a way to make someone feel warm. And it's been a big part of my relationship with myself over the last 18 months, and not working and being at home and being alone, has been to do things that are just because I want to, just because they seem fun. Make a mess. Right now, my living room it's got a lovely deep red carpet, and it is covered with pieces of cardboard no bigger than this, because my dog and I got into a fight with an Amazon box together and just started pulling it apart, and it just kept going until this large box was in tiny pieces. And I walked down to it today. We did that last night, and it was like Christmas morning to go down and see an absolute mess, and it's okay. And the mess is a symbol of the fun we had doing nothing. There were no rules to the game. It was me and my dog. And I have not done that at my own home. At the time that it arose, we just played and kept playing. And it was an absolute joy. And I know as soon as I start picking it up, that she's going to start grabbing at even the little pieces just to have a little bit more pulling. And honestly, that is a gift I haven't allowed myself to give myself for a very, very long time. And even being kind of in the background, listening to this conversation and not jumping in every quiet moment, from just learning to listen more. Get this conversation back on track, or add that thing you have in your notes that you want to say, and carrying that forward almost scares me. To do that all the time seems at some point untethered to the things that have I would call grounded me or kept me on track to get things done. But questioning all of that boundness with curiosity, and, well, what the hell? What if I didn't? What if just let the dog make the whole damn day's agenda, and followed the dog, or followed the energy of them, of her just taking care of herself and her curiosity? That in some ways seems thrilling to the kid in me and terrifying to louder parts of me. My relationship with self is feeling very, very blank canvas. I don't know how this is going to go, and it's thrilling and exciting. It's not what I thought 52 would feel like, that's for sure. It's got much more unknown and much more feeling like I'm going to surf a wave. I've got no steering wheel. I can't control the energy or the direction. I can just control myself on a board as we pay attention to the big energy pushing. It's glorious, actually, and terrifying, which is what a good wave is.
You know, I got a good question for you because I know you count on me asking you questions. So, how will you, whether you teach again or not, how will you integrate the professor with that child you're talking about? Because it's not about jettisoning the professor, it's about integrating with that child or reclaiming that child, but it is about integration.
Yeah, I got to watch both of my parents raise hundreds of other people's kids. And we had infants 6 weeks old at our daycare centers, and we had after school programs up to 6th grade. And some of these are, humans that I know to this day. Went to high school with them and grade school with them, and they were on my sports team, so they know my dad is Coach Fee. And my dad's gift was asking lots of questions and just getting an absolute kick out of the silliness of the answers of toddlers or preschoolers or 4th graders. And I think my own experience of school, especially university, and also kind of stumbling into it right out of industry. I came here I live in Minnesota, about an hour and a half south of Snake, in a place called Mankato. It's a gorgeous rural area, kind of hilly. A couple rivers can have a confluence here. It's a gorgeous little space, and I teach at a university here. And because I kind of stumbled through high school into college, and then stumbled my way to grad school, and then went into industry and thought I was there for my career, and came down to this place from Minneapolis to teach for 2 semesters. That was in '97, and I never left. And I think my family and my wife's, whose parents were also educators, like, we were doomed to be engaged in education somehow. So we moved down here and both started working at this university, and that was 25 years ago. My son was in the daycare center at the university, and yesterday we got his master's degree diploma mailed to the house. So he's been at this university from 3 years old till 26, preschool, and then off he went to regular school, and then came back for his bachelor's and master's. But my dad was a kid to this day is a kid. You've met him, Snake. I took him to South Africa to do his Mankind Project weekend, and he spent all 3 days literally getting in trouble, getting told by the leaders, "Knock it off, Tom," because he was hanging out with the 3 18-year-olds that were also part of the initiate group that were there from the school that I was working at. So this 69-year-old was kind of over in the corner with the chattering, smartass, giggling students. But he always loved being a kid with kids. And I've not fully brought that to my classroom and my students. My students love to do stuff. I teach construction management. These are not students that are there for enlightenment. They're there to be able to get a better job in the construction industry, but they like doing stuff and making stuff. And I found that my contact with alumni or contact with students outside of class over the last 3 semesters, when I haven't been teaching, has been fun and free of answering any questions or when's that due or how'd I do on that exam, and just listening. And it's a hard lesson to teach myself to shut the hell up. When profess is in the job title, I tend to speak a lot, and listening and then responding when things hit me as funny or I don't get it, and stepping outside of the role of Professor Fee and into, I'm just an old dude with gray hair listening to this kid and having a conversation that puts us on a very, I don't stand on the pedestal of a role. I just listen.
What you speak to is something that frightens a lot of people and keeps them from making dramatic moves like that too, is who am I without the role?
Yeah.
That's a frightening place for many. There's a a sense of here's who I am. It's all defined for you. And you step
Sure.
out of that role and it's disorienting as can be. I think
I
that's
like
one
that
of the
guy
reasons
who's
why I'm advocating for this relationship with self is that it counteracts a certain amount of the power of the roles we play, whatever they are.
I like that. I like the guy that you know more than I like the guy that puts on the professor role.
Yeah.
And I like bringing the guy you know to a bunch of 20-something students that come to me or interact with me with their expectation. I like bringing them the non-role me, the non-costumed me.
Yeah.
But it's not easy. It feels raw. It feels dangerous. It definitely feels risky. Oh my God, they're going to see me, the guy, me, Scott, me, the friend, the brother, the dude on the street.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't take much practice for it to feel much more natural and much more human and much more fair to whoever I'm interacting with, to just leave that behind and bring Scott without any letters before or after my name. And but it's not natural. It's not easy. It's not. It probably is natural and probably is easy. I've made it difficult because it's not my practice. It's not my relationship with myself. Is actually which one of these masks or roles do I put up in front of myself, and to go with none of those. After getting through the initial shock of, I guess I'm just going to be me, it does feel much more human and natural, just not typical. It's just not my practice. It's a new practice. But it's
actually shocked. Once a week, I take care of my 3-year-old grandson. All the screens go dark. I'm not willing to communicate with anybody but him. And we go walk around the neighborhood or go throw stones in a river or whatever. And what's amazed me is the roles that I play the rest of the week, how abrupt and different it is to just hang out like that and follow a 3-year-old through his day and talk silly and go watch cars race by on the highway. It's like somebody slammed on the brakes. And suddenly I'm just standing there and all the inertia of life disappears for a day. And I've really relied on that the last many years with both my grandchildren to have that island in my week that is just being a boy for that day. And it really grounds me for the rest of my week and the work that I do. It's like I really benefit from that reminder of just hanging out and taking my lead from the boys.
I'm lucky and blessed to know have a lot of friends from my childhood still be part of my life in some way. But I gotta say that you're the guy who acts like my friends acted in middle school and grade school, because you're the guy who will call up and say, hey, with a sly devilish grin, hey, want to go do something? And you're not calling to say, hey, think of something to do, let's go do it. You're saying, I've got an idea, I've got something planned, I got this thing I'm doing, you want to be part of it? And I haven't been invited to stuff that way since I was like 12. And then you started inviting me to stuff that way, and it totally brings out the boy in me and makes me want to tell myself, like, drop everything, say yes, don't ask the next question. He's daring you to ask, what are we going to do? He's daring you to not ask that and just say yes. And I've gotten better at that because of you. Like, yep, I'm in. What is it? And that's how I've ended up in prison with you, and out in South Dakota at the reservation with you, and a couple other things where the invitation is with raised eyebrows, like, I'm inviting you to do a thing. You want to do a thing? And the dare is say yes before you ask what the thing is. And that alone has, I think, improved my ability to do that in other places, or to ask things that way, not call and tell somebody, would you like to go with me at 8 o'clock on this day to this thing? And it'll cost this much, but hey, want to go do a thing with me next week? Are you in? And see if somebody can say yes first. That's a new dare that you taught me, but I think it's helped me kind of let go of, well, I need to know if it fits in my calendar. I need to know if I can afford it. I need to know if it's going to work with my wife or my schedule. It's improved my relationship to self to just say yes when you call me to do whatever. So thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
just want to pick up on that question, Snake, which is, who am I without my role? And so that's not the question that I ask. The question I ask is, what do I trade in? What is my trademark? And I've often looked to my uncle, who was extremely good looking as a young man and a middle-aged man, and he died 2 years ago, at the age of 92. He was also a teacher, and he taught history. And he traded in his good looks, and he traded in his incredible memory. But the older he got, the more cranky he got, and the more kind of dilapidated he got, and his memory began to suck. However, he tried what he could to trade in what he's always traded in. And he wasn't willing to let it go to like his I think, dying moment. And so for me, there's something to be said about not only what is my role, but what do I trade in? And my attachment to what it is that I trade in. And so, some of the comments that you're making, Scott, I'm thinking about what in fact we're talking about here is issues around my identity. Like who am I? It goes back to that question. Or who am I without the trappings of who I am? My identity, what I trade in. And then the other component is, and if I'm not my identity, and if I'm not trading in anything, then who am I exactly? And I think that is an existential question that is really difficult to answer. And so earlier on, folks, as when we were kind of having a chat before everybody came online, I remember I did a week workshop, it was a retreat called Warrior Monk with a chap by the name of Bill Kauth, who was the founder of the Mankind Project. And one of the exercises was one of those kind of repeated exercises, who are you? So, of course, I said, well, I'm a therapist. No, that's what you do for a living. Who are you? Oh, I'm a man. Well, that's obvious. Who are you? Well, I'm a son. Well, also that's obvious. And as that question kept being asked, it was like, well, I don't even know how to answer this. And as we kind of went deeper and deeper into that question, I finally got it. And the example I was giving these blokes was that, I'm the, and I don't mean to get esoteric here, so just stay with me. So I'm that raindrop on the leaf of a flower at sunrise as the sun is rising. And that was it. I got it. It was like a Zen question, or it was like a koan, yeah? And it was really interesting to kind of just let go of who I thought I was and just be, not be anything, but just be, and use my imagination. And so it comes back to what you were saying earlier on, Snake, about, hanging out with your 3-year-old. I think there's something extraordinary about children who haven't lost their imagination. They're curious about absolutely everything. And I was just thinking as we went through this conversation, I do ceramics because the kid part of me loves playing with mud. It's not even about the ceramics. It's about the mud. And the fact I can do something out of mud feels like a miracle, because the technology is mind-blowing. The science is mind-blowing. The creativity is mind-blowing. The whole act is just full of surprises from beginning to end. And it's that child part of me and the teenager part of me That's all he wants to do is play with clay. So I have to do a lot of negotiating with him because I like to also, there's the other part of me who likes to do what I do professionally. And there's this constant negotiation. But can you imagine like how cool, how happy they've been for the last 3 months, just playing with clay every fucking day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bravo.
No one pressurizing me except myself.
Bravo. I would like to connect with something that Scott said. He talked about being childish. And one of my goals is to become more childlike. And childlike is exactly what Mike just described. Mm-hmm. That you can have fun with your dog. By the way, what's your dog's name? I think we should honor this dog here.
My dog's name is Sarita, Sarita, Sarita.
Sarita. Great. How about Snake's grandson?
Elliot.
So they are all part of this relationship that helps you both live fully in their presence. And what a great thing for Elliot and Sarita. Yeah. And what a great thing for you that they're in your life.
Mm-hmm. And Alex, don't forget Mud.
Mud. Oh, I'm sorry, Mud, of course.
Don't forget Mud, my friend. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, God made, what did God make Eve out of Adam's rib, and he must have made Adam out of mud.
That's he did, right. But let's not take this to the God status. You've been in Budapest, you've been studying, but you got a ways to go here, Mike.
Yeah, but it's not even me, the adult, that's responding to this. It's the teenager saying, "Hey, don't forget about the mud, Alex."
There is that sense of wonder, and I know exactly what you're talking about, Mike, because a lot of my creative comes from, oh, I never saw that before. That fits with that. And there's a sense of wonder that comes out of the creativity that I really need. It's one of my human needs to feel healthy, engaged, happy. There's a sense of wonder. Gee, what if I put this there? What if I shaped that this way? That's always going through me and gives me great joy to be able to do that. And it's looking for beauty.
Yeah. And it's beautiful to observe and watch.
Yeah. I'm looking at the time now, and we've got about 10 minutes if we wanted to indulge in questions or whatever. Now would be a good time to do it.
Or even comments, yeah.
Yeah. Diella and Amanda are always good for questions.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find a way to articulate it, but maybe it will come out. I think for me, what I struggle with is what is the self? Because I'm often quite wrapped up in the relational self. Mm-hmm. So what aspects of myself come out in relationship to others? So I'm kind of like, oh, who am I then? Mm-hmm. I don't know if that made sense.
Totally. I think that hits into the main question here is we rarely consider that relationship with self. So your question to yourself is right on point with the topic. It bears looking at, not seeing some fatal flaw in you, but like we've said, all throughout a whole lifetime, this process continues. Discover new things about yourself. It's that amalgam that we discover about ourselves, not so much how others define us. That seems to be the mystery for many of us.
But Snake, there's another dimension to this, because if you think about it from the perspective of Buddhism, the Buddha said there's no such thing as a self. Mm-hmm. And that takes me back to that conversation I had earlier on. Who are you? And who am I? I am whoever I want to be. So if I want to be that raindrop on that leaf on that plant at sunrise, that's it. Yeah. So there's something quite extraordinary about our ability as human beings to keep reinventing ourselves, because according to Buddha, there's no self. And I want to support that that construct.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something really extraordinary about reinventing ourselves. You know, they talk about like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I'm an old dog and I got lots of tricks up my sleeve.
I like to frame that up as the willingness to be a full participant in evolving. It's like there's not a goal post here, or if there is, it's moving. At least it has been for me. But to be engaged in a constant evolution until the day I take the dirt nap, that excites me.
So is it the goalpost or is it the target?
I think it's
It
more
feels
a
it's more like a
direction
moving target.
like north, south, east, west, you know. I think it's more in that realm. Certainly not achievable short term, maybe, but you know, I know I'm roughly heading north, and I may deviate to the west or to the east, but I know my general direction. The rest will come as a surprise, and I'm thrilled about that.
I think I have to agree with Mike. I mean, I'm very much of the same opinion as Mike, is that there is no self. So I think for me, the relationship to self is constantly evolving. So it's much more about taking the time and the space to have a constant awareness. You were talking earlier of the things that feed you and the things that deplete you. And so knowing yourself in order to be aware of those things. But because I believe there is no self and it's a constant evolution and constantly moving, I think it's much more than about an awareness of where you're at that moment in time. So taking that time, you know, every day to think, okay, this is where I'm at now. This is who I am at this moment now. This is the self I am today. What do I need to feed me, or what will deplete me if I do this or that? And then being open to anything that comes up, again, being curious, observing from the outside and letting yourself evolve, but not being attached to a specific identity, but more
That's the point.
flux.
That's the point. That non-attachment, Amanda. And there's a question, if I can interrupt, is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
There's a question that you asked before the group came online, which is about what is the distinction or the difference between a narcissist and the neglected self, or what is the interface between a narcissist and the neglected self. I think there's something to be said, is that the narcissist in me is so attached to my identity, it becomes fixed. And when it becomes fixed, I literally, psychologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually deteriorate.
So it's all ego, yeah?
I'm afraid so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And malleable at the same time, unless we make it rigid.
Yeah.
Can you say more?
Yeah, I think probably the best corollary is as you age, different things become more important than others. You make different priorities, and that calls for a constant evolution. And ego, like what Mike's talking about, is almost like the role that Scott talked about, stepping away from being a professor. It becomes not only ego, but also an identity. This is who I am. So to a certain degree, I know in the past, I've fallen asleep because my ego or the role has such a firm grip on this is who you are. I needn't be curious. I needn't look outside or be present to listen. This is my role. I can fall asleep. I can sit on the couch and eat M&Ms if I want. And that lifestyle nearly killed me with depression and stuff at a particular point in time. Because by nature, I am curious. I resist a set role. It's never felt comfortable to me because that curiosity is always there. So how I would discern that is that ego part really is me taking the easy route. Here's my identifier. Here's who I am. Everyone seems to affirm that that's who I am. I needn't look any further. And that's been a very unhealthy place for me, to not look any further and just accept that particular ego.
Alex, you said something earlier on. You spoke about the idea of anything self-centered. I think you were talking about yourself. Anything self-centered is narcissism. That was one of the quotes that one of the things that you mentioned. But then you also used, there was a point you used the term humility. Humble was the word you used. And by the way, I didn't track that. But I do think there's something, I don't know if you can develop on that at all, but there was something about humility and being humble. Because people who are humble tend to be able to not be attached to an outcome. Whereas the narcissistic part of me is very attached to an outcome. I don't know if you can just develop on that for a moment, because I'm curious about that, and it might be,
Sure.
it could be useful for the rest of the group.
Sure. So when I was talking about that was my blueprint. Snake was talking about the blueprint around him. So in my family, anything that was directed towards yourself was despised. It's all about the group, it's about the family, it's about the community, it's about the country. So it was called narcissism, it was called self-centered. And it took me a long time to separate all those different labels. And I'm a student of Buddhism too, and I like it very much how Buddhism treats all these different parts. And the humble part just goes along with don't show off, don't stick out, you're not any special. Who the hell are you to do this or to say this? And integrate that way. To develop then a healthy ego, that has to be examined and has to be sorted out. And now at 72, I'm getting closer to knowing when I'm too attached to something, because I confuse it with loyalty. I'm being disloyal if I don't follow this blueprint that was imprinted on my brain by the amateurs.
Alex, disloyal to who?
To the blueprint.
Yeah.
To being a good citizen.
Paul, you got your hand up, my friend. You want to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, it's just reinforcing Alex's point, which is you've got all these social influences, you've got all the social media, and all that is about the group, not the individual. And society seems to be going down. You have to conform. You need all these Facebook friends, etc., etc. And the individual, I think, takes second fiddle under society now.
It's not clear to me, Paul.
Well,
can you develop on that?
Yeah. I mean, social influencers have followers. They get influenced by having millions of followers, isn't it? So this person is providing, I suppose, advice or basically pearls of wisdom to their followers, and people hang on every word they submit. And that is all about the group adopting or endorsing that influence, which is why they're becoming so influential. And so I think the individual is losing sort of their contact. Everyone's looking at what's on social media, who is saying what, and taking cognizance and probably following it to the nth degree in terms of what someone else is saying, rather than being true to themselves.
Absolutely. So I want to give you an example of that. Some of you must know Katie Price. Katie Price, I'm absolutely fascinated with this woman. She has over 4 million fans. She has over 4,000 lookalikes.
Yeah.
They've totally over-identified with Katie Price. They want to be Katie Price. They dress like Katie Price. They behave like Katie Price. And there's a beautiful example of that poll. 4 million Facebook fans and Instagram fans and 4,000 lookalikes. They have Katie Price lookalike parties and events. So that once again, it raises this question about identity and how important identity is and what we trade in. Because if I don't have an identity and I don't have anything to trade in, then who am I? And I just love the idea that we can come back to this notion of that actually from the Buddhist perspective, that actually you can be whoever you want to be because there's no such thing as a self. It's the same as the conversations we had in the past around, we make up stories. Those stories that I make up about myself and everybody else is not even real. I just make them up as I go along. So I love that example, Paul. Thank you.
It's real relevant in terms of, I remember a person born and raised in Switzerland, not Alex, but somebody else, who said, you don't want to be the piece of wheat that grows above the rest of the pasture.
Don't do that.
If one stands up above all the rest, it'll get lopped off. And that person had a devil of a time in the United States because there wasn't the group mind to the extent that there was in Switzerland. And so we're all under the influence of those different social structures in terms of how we approach, whether this is narcissism or arrogant or whatever, to look at yourself as an individual and develop that part that is good to overcome. I think we all need that kind of independence and creativity that comes from that. It's a very tribal way of looking at things.
Did your Swiss friend live in Minnesota?
No.
See, that could have been a real help, because moving here from Chicago and trying to teach my students how to do interviews and introduce themselves, the do not brag training that these students have received from their families of origin that are, that have the diversity of being Swenson spelled S-O-N and Swenson spelled S-E-N, Norwegian and Finnish and Swiss, or Swedish in their family. Like, that's the diversity in some of these rural areas around here where I teach, and getting them to actually just state, I'm in the National Guard. That seems a little over the line as far as being able to tell one story, because that's a little braggy.
Yeah.
And I think that part of my journey that my students have helped me on is to be very aware that I come from a culture in Chicago, and my family of origin and extended family, where we'll brag about things we haven't done. And here we can't get students to admit to accomplishments they've actually accomplished in their life. And that ability to tell one's own story is a huge part of my relationship with myself, because the more I repeat kind of a pat answer to who are you, what's your bio, the more I believe in that story. And I realized over the last year and a half that I haven't checked that story in a very long time, especially living in a semester to semester life where I'm meeting new students all the time and going to conferences and whatever, and repeating. I'm solidifying a story that I realized I hadn't given a real read to in a long time. And so part of my relationship with myself that's been changing over this last year and a half of not teaching is being able to explore and not repeat my own story of self, which I think I have more of a relationship that I understand than any of the other relationship with self pieces. My relationship with my story of myself is really where my understanding of my relationship with myself lives, and not exploring that is not fully or even really at all exploring the relationship between me and self.
Yeah. Well,
unfortunately, I have to say goodbye.
I think
there's part of me that is being called away for family moving here. So I really, really enjoyed being here. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Snake. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Scott. Thank all of you. I learned a lot and I enjoyed myself talking to the world here. I love being international. So with that, I'm signing off.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Yeah, I was just going to say we should probably wrap it up. But I think where Scott leaves it is a really good place. You know, my intention in pulling this together was to have people go, well, what about my relationship with myself? To ask themselves that question. I've certainly been doing that and struck by how much it's evolved or not been present at all over the course of my life. So I hope it's provoked some curiosity in all of you.
So, Snake, before people go, is there anybody who has another comment or a statement or a question before we say goodbye? Anything burning? Lots to think about?
I just want to say thank you so much. Incredibly stimulating conversation.
Thank you. And we'll put it up online, and I'll probably shoot it off to everybody else. And if you want to share it with others, please do. But thanks very much for being here, Snake. Thanks very much for coming up with this idea and pulling your mates into this conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I appreciate the fact that everybody else has been here virtually for the whole program, the whole session. I know most of you. Love you. Thanks very much for being here. See you and I see you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
That was Mike Fisher and Snake Bloomstrand from the British Association of Anger Management, joined by Alex von Bitter and Scott Fee on the Wisdom Track podcast, where they were all discussing the neglected self. You can read more articles by Snake over on our blog at angermanage.co.uk, and we're back on the 4th of December when we're talking about emotional resilience. It's very topical, of course. Many of us have had our resilience challenged over the past couple of years. So we'll be discussing that as part of our annual Anger Awareness Week. Sign up to our newsletter at angermanage.co.uk to receive announcements about that, or even better, subscribe to our YouTube channel or over on Apple Podcasts. You'll find us under The Wisdom Track. Please do hit the like button on the way out, or even leave a comment. That kind of engagement is very useful when it comes to us getting the message out there. From everyone at the British Association of Anger Management, thank you for listening. Keep wise, everybody, and we'll see you soon.